Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, I see names starting. Oh, it looks like, St. Patrick's. St. Patrick's is coming on strong with Maria Kaplan and Michelle Logan. And I'm here. St. Patrick's.
Sarah responded to that one.
Liz Mora?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I see a few more of our attendees are arriving. We are expecting about 40 today. So I'm going to give a few more minutes until we get a larger group present.
Sarah, in giving the instructions for the chat bar, if you can please say when they go to send chat to make sure that it's going to organizers and panelists.
Okay.
Please, and thank you.
All right, we still have people coming in. We're getting close to 20 now, so we'll wait a few more minutes.
Sarah, are you able to see and hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't. But at this point, it's fine. We just need to make sure that you're on audio.
Yes, I had to join through my phone, so that's why.
Okay, that will work for us today.
Okay.
So thank you all for coming. We're right at 1 o'clock, but I want to honor everybody's time for logging in. So I'm going to go ahead and begin with a few opening remarks, then we'll pray and launch right into the conversation. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to say right now, I have some answers, but I have a lot of I don't knows. We're in an I don't know place right now. Hopefully, though, this will give you some guidelines for thinking about what formation might look like in your parish in the fall. This webinar is being recorded, so really only Christine and I have to worry about how we look. You are all in listen-only mode. So you do have the opportunity, though, to ask questions. Both Doug and Kately are online, even though you can't see them. They're monitoring the chat line. So if you have a question, you can use the chat box, send to the organizer and panelists. They'll review the questions as they come in, and I'll pause periodically throughout the presentation for questions to be answered. Kately is sending the PowerPoint. You may have already received it. It is available in both English and Spanish. The slides match those on the screen, but we thought those might be helpful for you if you wanted to follow along. I think those are our notes. Did I miss anything, panelists?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So let's begin with a prayer for wisdom. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Great is the wisdom of the Lord. God Almighty, your wisdom includes an understanding of what is fair, what is logical, what is true, what is right, and what is lasting. It mirrors your pure intellect. I entreat you to grant me such wisdom, that my labors may reflect your insight. Your wisdom expands in your creations, displaying complexity and multiplicity. Your wisdom is an eternity ahead of man. May your wisdom flourish forever. We offer this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. And Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So thanks again for joining us. In this, we're basically going to go through a few movements. If we look at this next slide, let me see if I can move. So in our time together, we're going to talk a little bit about what catechesis is and the ideas of community and balance, which are going to be the trickiest parts for us as we envision formation at a distance. The three scenarios that are being offered by the Catholic Schools Office are going to be presented just so we can see how those might be models for us. Then how do we make informed decisions? There's a tendency to want to panic right now as we're feeling an urgency to respond, but how can we slow down and be informed and use this wisdom that we prayed for? And then we'll look at the key elements of what are our instructional considerations as we make our decisions, what are health and safety principles if we are in a position to gather together, and what will be the child protection requirements specifically for online learning. And then we'll have an extended question period at the end, but again, I'll pause a couple times throughout the presentation just so you have a sense of, we can pause and ask questions that are appropriate to that particular time. Okay. So, catechesis and catechesis in this new world. How do we look at this? How do we, one, understand catechesis in this echoing down of the faith? And what we're going to find, I think, is in our online models, they're going to be a great tool for us to share information, to share what it is we believe about our faith, which is essential, but it also is going to make it hard for us to do some of those lived practices, which are in some ways, having the parents engage with us might be, some of those elements are going to be easier to catechize, and others are not. We are going to run the risk the more that people are away from us, how do we build community? Because we are a people of faith. We come together to worship. We come together to celebrate and live. How are we going to create that feeling when we're not necessarily together? And we're already seeing this with so many people justifiably anxious about returning to Mass. How are we going to still be a community of faith? And so that's going to be a huge consideration for us in every model that we look at. So we have this responsibility to train people so that they know what it is we believe, but also how we love, live, and celebrate that. So how are we going to, what are the things that we're going to put in place with the tools that we have, with either virtual, in person or blended, so that we can make sure that we're treating the whole person and not just informing people of what it is we believe. Right now, more than ever, I think people are desperate for community because we've been on our own for so long, it seems like. So how will create community be a part of what we do? And it has to have this missionary dynamism. So this is all a beautiful quote from Catechesis DRE, completely unedited, which speaks to our time, because in this, we're going to, as leaders, have to have a missionary dynamism, but we're also going to ask our catechists and certainly our parents to see themselves as missionary, leaders, forerunners in new models, which are going to be unfamiliar to most of us. But how are we going to help everybody understand their rights and responsibilities so that everybody can take up their piece and become this missionary church? And this is really what Pope Francis has been calling us to for many years now. And even his predecessors were doing this. How do we become the new missionary church? What is this new evangelization? How are we these intentional disciples going out to the world? Well, now we have to take that really seriously in a new way. And how do we see this challenging time of pandemic and crisis? How do we see it as an opportunity to learn from what we had to do very, on the fly in the spring, and turn that into intentional formation that builds really robust programs going forward? So we have to find balance. So what's the balance going to be? We don't throw away everything we ever did. We need to take stock of what we've done in the past that was really successful, what's meaningful to our programs, what's part of our parish history. What are those traditions that mark our particular community? We want to hang on to those. But if there are practices that were not great, if it was just, everybody come and we're going to read out of the textbook, well, that's something it's time to let go of, even though that's scary. And maybe our catechists don't feel prepared, but how do we keep what was beautiful, learn from that history, and have the courage to let go of, and the honesty to let go of the things that really were not effective? But just if we do that without wisdom, without stopping to think, to be reflective about this, we can also lead to confusion. Whatever model your parish decides on, and I believe that out of 139 parishes, we're going to have 139 different models. There's just no way that all of this will be common to anybody. There are common elements, but what it's going to look like in every parish is going to be different. So, it's talking and listening to other leaders, but knowing that what they're doing may not be a good fit for your parish. So, we need to be thoughtful as we improvise in a good way. How do we make sure whatever we do, though, is really well communicated? In all of this, we have to communicate. And even if our communication is, we're just starting to think about how this is going to look, parents at least want to know that. They want to know that we're thinking about this. But once we do decide, we need to make sure that we're communicating that regularly. Okay. And we just need to think about, in our church history, since the Second Vatican Council, we've been invited to come into this new spirit of looking at the signs of the times. The signs of the times are so different now than they were 1 year ago at this time, right? So what are the signs of the time? Well, we still are called to preach the gospel. We are still called to share the truths of our faith in a really authentic and complete way, but maybe not as systematically as we've done in the past, because parents are going to be overwhelmed. So how are we going to balance what we think that the families need, what they think they can take on, what's essential to the truth of our faith? How do we find that balance? So it's going to take this wisdom, it's going to take courage, it's going to take fidelity to the teaching of the church. So what's not going to change? The truth. The truth of the church is always the truth of the church. That doesn't change. How we share that information, how we use that information to form disciples, that's going to look different. It has to. And even if we're looking at completely, back in parish, gathering together, that will look different than it has in the past, simply because we're going to have to be farther apart. So all of this is both an exciting and a terrifying time, because there's always, hope in visioning for new, improved models. It means that we have to take the time. It means that we have to put the resources into it. And sometimes it's scary to take that leap of faith, even in our programming. So that's kind of the overview and the vision for how do we still make catechesis as important as it is. We understand that people are going to be overwhelmed, especially if they're at home trying to school their children and everything else and work full time. We want to make faith formation an integral part of what they are doing when they're together, but we don't want it to become something that's such a burden that they just give up, right? So it's that balance of really, helping families through this, helping catechists through this. I think we're going to have to use all of our diplomatic skills and our encouragement and really put some time and thought into training so that we can make sure people are comfortable with whatever this new model looks like. So I want to pause there, check in with Doug and Caitlin and see if we have any questions.
No questions yet, Sarah, but we again encourage everyone to chime in on the chat and send it again to organizers and panelists that are in the chat.
Okay. All right, we'll move on then. So here we are, a key distinction that we have to make. Family formation and at-home learning. Now, there is some overlap because family formation happens at home, but the way the church articulates the two are very different. And there's a third category in this, and that's homeschooling, Catholic homeschooling, where parents do all of the formation of their children, all of the academic areas as well as their faith formation. So there's that homeschool model that's not addressed in any of this. This is for those kids who have been signing up for our religious education programs in the past. What are our models going to look like? So family formation is that model where everybody in the family is catechized at an age-appropriate level, particularly the parents, so they can teach their children the faith. So in a family formation model, if we're saying we want to do family formation in the fall, we're going to have to build into our programming formation for the parents as well as what they're going to do then or how they are going to catechize their children. Because in this, we're going to give them some of the information they need, but then they're also going to need lessons or resources to implement that. So if we're looking at a family formation model in its truest sense, in a good sort of way, it doubles our work because we're forming the parents. But that also means then that there are more active agents, that they're going to be part of this process, which will make the learning at home more fruitful. But we need to make sure that if we're looking at something that we want to call family formation, that we are very intentional about how we're going to form the parents, in what way, what are those expectations, as well as then what will be the expectations for them to catechize their children. In this format, there may or may not be a publisher resource. I know Sophia Press has, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the names. They have, Ignatius Press has a family faith model. It's built on the pillars of the catechism, so it doesn't align tremendously well with our archdiocesan curriculum, which is spiral, scope, and sequence. But it does offer some nice family resources. And there is also the program out of Minnesota, which has, again, some resources for the parents and some lessons for students. That one is very, I guess in a good way, it's not online, but that also means that if you were to look at that model, you would have to figure out, one, how you were going to form the parents, but then also how are you going to get to them the hands-on resources that they're going to need to catechize their children. The other model, which I think is going to be more of, certainly of the people that I've spoken with, parishes are looking at home learning models. So this would be what often we're calling the virtual model. This is, Sadlier has an online program where you can look at the lessons online. You could also use a traditional textbook. Loyola Press has, the same. Most of our major publishers have elements of their traditional textbook series available online, such that you could, have them grant them access to those resources online. In most of these models, there is still the element of the sessions. The catechesis has been done by the catechist. The catechist is leading the instruction in some format. And then parents, their role in this is to engage, one, in helping their students complete the lessons, but also then doing some of the family prayer activities that are supplemented through these online publishers. The one kind of big exception to that would be My Catholic Faith Delivered, which has theirs is called a flipped classroom, where the expectation is that students just go on and work through the lesson at home through an online platform, and they're using Ignatius Press's textbook Faith and Life series, which has then some of the tracking components, but it's not led necessarily by a catechist, and it doesn't give supplemental information for the parents to help them answer any questions. So it becomes a very privatized experience, and we want to avoid that to the extent we can. So it's looking at both of these, and these, of course, are both ones that are focused primarily at home, but there are elements of both of these that should and could be woven into some kind of blended program where we have some gathering together and some that is in an online platform. So, questions on that?
Nothing yet.
Ooh, okay. So the three scenarios that the Catholic Schools Office are asking every principal to consider. They're asking them to have three scenarios in mind to plan for all three in some form. They want to have options is what they want to have. Ideally, they're encouraging schools to be fully operational with students physically present on a regular basis. That may not mean 5 days a week, all day, but that there will be primarily 80% is kind of their goal in terms of calling physical attendance and being fully operational. And that has all the hosts of safety protocols, which are much more rigorous for schools than they will be for our parish programs. Just because they're there all day. They do a lot of moving from room to room. They have to deal with recess. They need to figure out how how and where to eat. So some of those big things that will keep schools from opening in a fully operational, physically present mode may not be deterrents for us. Right now, to be a small program is a really good thing, especially if you're a small program that has a big building. I was talking with Kathy at Mount Calvary. She's got the ideal. She's got a great big huge building and not hundreds and hundreds of kids. So physically distancing is a very real possibility for her, right? But that, again, that may not be the case for other small programs. You may have a small program and small spaces. So, and other things that you'll need to think about with this physical attendance is if you're going to gather students and or families, parents, when is that going to be? Is that going to be at the same time that you've done in the past? If it's Sunday morning, that's more complicated because we are still going to want to limit, even though it's convenient for the parents, having more people moving around on parish property at the same time is not going to be as desirable. So again, it's how do we then think about how that balance might be. The second option for them is fully virtual. They are really hoping not to do fully virtual for a variety of reasons, just because, I mean, it was even shown in that short time in the spring that, you know, the content of instruction is just not nearly as robust. But again, it's all the subject areas. So, and parents are working full time. And so, you know, how fully virtual might look for us could be different. And for us, it might not be as necessarily academically focused, but certainly as people who are forming disciples in the faith, those communal and balance pieces that I was mentioning in our first slides are going to be really the tricky part for us if we're looking at fully virtual. That's not to say it can't be done. It just means that we're going to have to really think about that. And how are we going to be a relational people when our relationships are harder to see, when we don't have students necessarily right in front of us, or catechists right in front of us. And I think that the fully virtual may be really hard for catechists. And it may be that we find a whole new group of catechists who say, well, I could never have done the model where I needed to show up every Tuesday night, but you know what? I can do an online model. So it may be that we need to also consider, if we're looking, even in if a blended program with the virtual elements, there may be people who could not have been catechists or volunteers in our programs that will be able to do so in this new model. So how do we think about that? How do we invite them? How do we engage them? And I think the schools are thinking for right now, but realistically, they're going to have a blended of physical and virtual based on the group gatherings that are particular to whatever their jurisdiction or region is. So, and we're already seeing that. I mean, you know, a lot of Montgomery County is just now able to gather for Mass, and that's just not been, you know, some of our southern parishes are already doing that. And we have some really big churches where physical distancing makes it very easy to have a big program, and others where it's not. So I'm getting a lot of feedback. Sorry. So anyway, blended and physical, this blended physical and virtual is going to look really different. And it may be that it's primarily virtual with a little bit of physical, or it may be that it's primarily physical with a little bit of virtual. And then with each of those, you know, then you have to think of both what the in-person protocols are going to be as well as the online protocols. So if we're doing the fully operational physical attendance, our focus is in what are the health and safety requirements that we need to focus on. If it's fully virtual, what are all those online components and expectations that we're going to have to comply with? And then when we do a blended program, we're going to have to do some of both. So we're going to just have to think like we've not thought before. So, questions?
We don't see any questions in the chat, Sarah, but I just want to encourage all who are listening, if you have any trouble accessing the chat, it's on the right-hand side. But you are also welcome to email either Doug or myself with any questions that you may have. Again, if you have any trouble, the chat is on the right-hand side. There is a little arrow that links you out to the chat, and you can type your questions to the organizers and the panelists. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. So, as we start to think about what this might look like, and maybe you've already had a conversation with your pastor. If you haven't, have a conversation with him. What's his expectation? What's his hope? If he says it's all you, that's both great and really difficult. But if you haven't had that conversation, please begin there. The handout that I sent last Friday, the pastors got earlier in the week so that they could at least, my hope was at least it made them, encourage them to think that they need to think about what formation might look like in the fall, even though many of them are just tremendously busy right now trying to figure out how to gather again for the celebration of the sacraments. So once you've had that conversation and kind of have a sense of what his hope is, then you need to identify all your stakeholders. What's your staff capacity? If you're a staff of one, then all of this is going to be on you in some form, unless you can find volunteers to help you with your staffing. Who are your catechists current? Who might be your potential catechists? And parents. And we have to ask all of these cohorts, what are their hopes and what are their needs? Particularly the parents, because if we're going to engage them in a new, more robust manner, we need them to be on board. We need to hear their voices so that we can more accurately respond to their needs. If you're chiming in via phone, can you mute your phone so we don't hear the background noise? Thanks. So this could take the form of a simple questionnaire. In the questionnaire, it's, how comfortable are you with whatever model, with technology? How comfortable are you sending your child back to the parish property? What are your technology needs? Do you feel comfortable that you could do something online if that were an option? All of these things we need to think about, right? And then it's aligning what you as a staff think you can do. What are the resources, the money that you need to, we may need to invest in new online textbooks. We, may need to upgrade our technology, so what are those pieces? But as we ask people questions, 3 that we have to ask are, what do you think a successful program looks like? So for me as a parent, what do you think a successful faith formation program looks like for your child, right? I don't know if we've ever asked parents that. That's a great question for us to ask every year, because adults like to be treated like adults. They like to be able to express their hopes, their dreams. We have to be clear that we can't match everybody's hopes and dreams, but we can say we did our best effort to combine the information that we had. We should ask each cohort what model they would prefer, right? Knowing full well that in many instances we won't be able to do that. But if we know that everybody is anxious about virtual, but would rather be virtual because the idea of being in person is terrifying, that's really helpful for us to know, right? Especially for our volunteers who are, going to be working and doing whatever they have to do, and then try to do this in a new model. And for so many of us who have, lovely, volunteers who've been at this forever and ever, and who are going to be in our high risk category, if we're going to be gathering in person, how do we allow them to gracefully say, I don't think this is right for me now? How do we, because the volunteers, bless them, most of them have really good Catholic guilt. So we don't want them to feel guilty if they really are anxious about coming back. So how do we give them a graceful opportunity to opt out if they need to? And then there's the question of, do they want to shift mid-year if we start virtually, but then really want to transition to in-person as health and safety requirements allow us to do? Or would they just rather say, for good or ill, we're going to just take a single format for the whole year, which really is only an option for the virtual, because anything that has to do with the physical gathering is always going to be subject to change. So, but there may be parents that say, the idea of just having the same thing all year is what I need. I just need that constant. There are other parents who are going to say, I cannot do this all year long. So at the earliest opportunity that we can be back in parishes in some form, that's what I need. Again, we just need to get a sense of where most of our parents are so that we can plan according to their needs. And if that falls out really strongly one way or the other, that makes one less decision for you to make, right? Or it makes it an easier decision for you to make. And as you do that, then you're going to be led toward one of those three basic scenarios that we're looking at. And once you do that, you're going to have to say, what are new resources we might need, or how do we modify things that we've done in the past? One of the challenges with shifting to a new textbook or online series that is different than one you've used in the past means that your catechists who may have been very comfortable with the old resource are going to have to revise, regroup, rework their lessons a little bit, which is not bad in itself. I mean, that's that stagnation that we want to get away from, but it's also putting more work on them. So is there the ability to take what we were doing before in some new format? Again, what that would look like is going to be different. And for some parishes, it might be, everybody stop by and get your child's textbook. At some point, we're not going to do this online completely, but we want to be able to use the textbook we've used in the past. So here it is. That's one way it might look. If there's a parallel book that we have in printed format and online, then parents could say, guess what? I just want the online piece. I want a textbook. But then if you were to shift to a blended model later in the year, then what would those students do about the textbooks? So there are just those kind of things that we need to think about. How are resources going to look in whatever model? Once we've done that, we've gotten the input, we've said this is the way we're going to go, we've identified what our resources are going to look like, then we can articulate to everybody what their responsibilities are, what their rights are. So we're going to tell the catechist, this is what's going to be expected in this new model. This is what's going to be expected of students and parents. And allowing everybody this rights and responsibilities, which is great. It's our Catholic social teaching. It's so important for us, and it should have been all along in catechesis for us to say, parents have a right to quality faith formation for their children, but they also have a responsibility to be part of that quality faith formation of their children. And then again, we do that for our catechists. What are your rights? You don't have to do this. You don't have to give, that much more extra time. This is not all on you. So they have that right, but then they have the responsibility to give it their best effort in whatever the new model is. And then as staff, we need to think about that for ourselves as well. What are my responsibilities? But what can I reasonably expect from families and catechists? The more clear this is, the better it will be for everybody going forward when there are questions or frustrations, just to say, this is what we outlined and this is what the expectations were. In this, then we move from there to set the timeline. So to get this up and running, we set what we want our start date to be and work backward from that. So what do you want your first day of gathering to be? I'm kind of encouraging parishes to shoot for October instead of September this year, just because I think that September is going to be a big transition time for parents as they're getting their kids enrolled in school. You know, what we don't want to do is start right at the same time that parents are trying to get ramped up for school, whatever that at school in the fall is going to look like. A few parishes have said they're going to start in August so that they're ahead of the curve. That's fine. Although parents may just be weary and want August off. If they know they're going to be doing, you know, full-time work and, you know, full-time school of their kids beginning September, they may just want August to be not completely programmed. Again, that might be something that you ask when you're talking about, you know, stakeholder information. But if you say, okay, well, we're willing to defer till October, well, then we're going to expect some really robust work to kind of make up, you know, or we're going to expect that you really do your part so that that lost time doesn't also reflect lost formation. So you set your timeline by determining what you want your start date to be, and then we're going to work backwards. It's important first that if you have staff and you're using some kind of new resource, that everybody be trained well so that they can support catechists and parents who may contact you for questions. Once you have your staff trained, then work with your catechists to make sure that they're comfortable and confident with what they need. And then we're going to make sure our parents and students know and have whatever the technology, if it is technology that they need. And then we have to be willing to come up with alternatives if they don't have access to a virtual platform that we've decided to go with. How will we then not exclude them by virtue of that choice? Because the last thing we want to do is make people feel that they're not welcome just because they don't have the computer or the bandwidth to be part of the program. So how are we going to try to build decisions and choices into this so that we can make sure everybody has fair access? And then communicate. Make sure that, you know, the Father's been part of this process all along. I think it would be great if pastors would draft a letter and ask Father to send it out to families to say, look, this is exciting, it's scary, this is what we're going to do for the fall. I look forward to this being really a great time for us to see that catechesis is the responsibility of everybody, you know, whatever it is. But I think if we get that kind of common communication that we're sending out to catechists, you know, thanking them profusely for being creative and flexible, you know, and to parents for being creative and flexible, you know. So in whatever communication you do, I think thanking everybody first is going to be essential. Making people feel respected and appreciated, because this is all it's going to involve more work for everybody. You know, begin with the thank you, but then be as clear as you can with everybody about what expectations are, what timelines are going to be, what resources are going to be used, you know, as detailed as you can make that. And it might be helpful to send it out in installments rather than, you know, the 14-page document that all the priests got on how to open a parish. I think most of them were stunned by the time they got to page 3. So we don't want to overload with information, but we do want to make sure everybody has the information. So maybe it's parsing it out. You know, look for next week, you know, here's the introduction. Next week, we're going to give you, here's what you need to think about for setting aside time. Here's what the prayer, you know, we're hoping that you're going to do with your child. Those kind of things. And build so that, you know, over the course of a month, you've communicated the full vision in sound bites that people can feel like they can accomplish. So I'm going to pause again.
So we have yet to receive any questions via the chat, but we have heard from or received emails from some leaders that there is some difficulty with accessing the chat. So again, we would just encourage everyone, if you have any questions or would like to share any comments or best practices, if you can just send us an email, either to myself or to Doug. There have also been some questions about the recording of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and has been recording since the start of this. So even if you came in a couple of minutes late for whatever reason, we will have that webinar available for everybody following today's session. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay. So then we look at within, so it's first the whole vision of catechesis, then it's what format are we looking at, and then in whatever format you're prioritizing, there are three elements. It's going to be the instructional considerations, the health and safety, physical health and safety protocols, and the online child protection requirements. So if you're looking at gathering, you're going to have to think about, in the physical learning, are you going to use textbooks, right? How and what kind of textbook? You certainly, there's the question of, do you keep the textbooks there and then hand them out to the kids every week, or do you have the kids bring in the textbooks in and out? If we're modeling what they're doing in the parishes, all of the hymnals are not going to remain in the churches during this extended period of time. So certainly when you're thinking about that kind of physical limitation, it would probably be best to have the students take the books, but we know like the bring back option is challenging, right? But for our instructional considerations, what catechetical resource are you going to use? We have Doug's working this summer on reviewing a few of the new resources. Just as a reminder, we don't recommend any resource that has not been reviewed for compliance by the USCCB's Catechetical Review Conformity List. So if it does not appear on that list as an approved resource, either a full textbook curriculum series or a sacramental preparation series, if it doesn't have that recommendation or that approval, we will likely not recommend it as a resource, because that's the theological content. When we do a review of a resource, it's for, multicultural diversity, for, does it have great support for catechists? Does it have nice online pieces? Does it have great family prayers? So we're looking much more at the methodological aspects. So if you're looking creatively for catechetical resources, we will have some updated reviews at the end of this, probably at the end of July. But note that you can look at if you just do a Google search of USCCB Catechetical Conformity List, you can see a list of the currently approved resources, or you can just email us, we can share that with you. They are much less likely to approve completely online resources because it is so easy to change an online resource that they can't get a static view of the resource. So you will find more often than not on those lists textbooks that may be a printed textbook but also have an online piece. If you're doing blended or completely online, what are the technology requirements? What's the accessibility? For many families who may have limited computers, is it something that can be done on a phone? If not, how will families that may not have access to a computer, an iPad, or something like that, how will they be able to access the content? And for some regions, it's just there simply is the internet is sketchy. Like it's not consistent. So again, that's something that's mostly in our deep south and a few of our kind of pockets way up north. But those are things that we need to make sure that we've considered so that people are not excluded just because of technology. So that will be something, and the beauty is some of the online programs that are really robust take more bandwidth, and so they are not as flexible in terms of they need to be done on a computer. So we have to weigh the considerations of those that have a lot of support and meat to them may also be limiting because they need a fuller, more current, computer to actually load and run. And then with this then is, again, training for catechists. helping them understand what being a catechist online looks like. I have to say that I find presenting online tremendously difficult because, as you notice, I move my hands a lot. I started doing these in rocking chairs because then at least I feel like I'm moving around because I pace when I present. So what are things like that that might be difficult for catechists? And how do we think about training for prayer, right? Because prayer online can be beautiful, but it requires different elements. It requires that maybe we're adding music or a beautiful image to look at. And if we're physically present, and we want to gather around a prayer table, well, we're going to have to be 6 feet apart. So what are the training pieces for, whether we're online or in person? What are those things that we're doing that are going to have to look different, that we need to make sure that we've thought about in advance so that a catechist doesn't get into a situation and not know what to do? And this contingency planning for long and short-term campus closures is, I had asked the interim superintendent for Catholic schools, to look at the slide deck. And that was the one thing she really said that we need to think about is, if we're thinking we're going to do some kind of blended or in person, what will be our plan if we have to shut down for the fall, or if we have to shut down for a few weeks, and this is essential for the schools, but I think it's important for us as well, because if we were to have families gathering, students gathering, and one of our catechists or volunteers tested positive, we would need to go through the contact tracing protocols and make sure that all the families knew that. And we would probably close our campus, our parish center, whatever, where our meeting space, for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how significant that was. So that's just something you need to think about. And I am on the Schools Reopening Advisory Board, and they're hoping to have their protocols for schools done by July 15th. And then I will be able to take elements of that to share with you. And one of the key pieces of that is a communication strategy. There's elements of, okay, we've decided that it's just not safe for us to continue to meet in person. Here's what we're going to do. More importantly, it's if a student, a volunteer, tested positive after being on our campus, how do we communicate that to everybody in an effective manner so they can take the precautions they need to take? And that will be extremely well scripted. It will be a checklist, to my understanding. It's going to be kind of a checklist of this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. Here's the letter you send out. Here's what you need to do to let Father know, so all of that. So hopefully that will be something that we can just adapt from the schools so that it meets our needs for communication. These last 3 are a little bit of a moving target. So as you know, in the past, the instructional requirement is a minimum of 30 hours of catechetical instruction. That's going to be harder for us to monitor, especially in a virtual format, unless we're having catechists do the training. If we have a catechist, or a leader, somebody presenting an hour a week or whatever for 30 weeks, then it's easy enough for us to see that we're doing that. The more we pass off to the parents in terms of if they're going to be doing that more family formation model, it's harder for us to identify that we've had that 30 hours of catechesis. I've written and asked Archbishop Gregory to weigh in on what his expectations are for catechetical instruction. So, but he's got some other bigger decisions he needs to make right now. So as soon as we know that, but I think, again, for us to be as complete and authentic as we would have been in the past is our goal. We don't just say we're going to do less because it's a different situation. It's we're going to do different, but we still want to make this as robust as we can in many ways, our families need faith more now than ever. So how are we doing this in such a way that we're also helping them, parents, learn to turn to faith, which will just only improve this whole process for us. The same holds true with the faith knowledge assessment. I have asked the Archbishop to, of course, it was waived in the spring. He has not indicated if he would like us to take the faith knowledge assessment this year or not. It is available online because that's how the schools have done it for all these years. So we could look to having it available online for those parishes that are doing a virtual format where that could take place. For parishes who are doing something blended, it might be that we can make the paper and pencil format available. I'm thinking that we are going to say it's not going to be an option in the fall for those few parishes who did the assessment in the fall, just because there are too many unknowns. So I think it will be a spring assessment for everybody, if that's what the Archbishop would like. And again, once he lets me know what his hopes are for that. I know that he very much likes the idea of the assessment in terms of some accountability. It allows him as the Archbishop to see where our students are in terms of what they know about their faith. I mean, we all know that the FKA gives us a lot of good data, but it is just one marker. It shows us what those students can articulate that they know about their faith. But for him as an Archbishop, that's interesting and helpful information for him. So I know he likes the idea of it. I just think he's trying to weigh the pastoral considerations of, is assessment, informal assessment is always essential. So whatever you're looking for in terms of blended, in person, online, there should be some kind of informal assessment that people are learning that they're getting something out of what you're doing. But this more formal assessment, we're not sure what that is if that's going to take place. And the third piece is safe environment training is going to still be required because we have to have some kind of record for the USCCB audit, which we submit to every year. So safe environment retraining will be required. It will be offered virtually, it's my understanding, even if you're meeting in person, because the Child Protection Office has checked in with the Bishops' Conference, and they have said, because this is such an unusual year, they want the same format for everybody. They don't want some people to do it live and some people to do it online. And since we can't guarantee that everybody can do it live, we're going to do it online. And that will be something that is developed by the Office for Child Protection and the Office for Catechesis. What that's going to look like, it's either going to be an adaptation of the Virtus program, or it might be a development of the Circle of Grace or a hybrid of the two. But we will be responsible for getting that to you and then communicating what the tracking system is going to be in terms of making sure that kids have participated in that particular session. So I'll pause again.
Awesome. So we do have some questions. So Doug, you can start us off.
Yep. So the question came in, Sarah, regarding use of schools for religious education classes and how it will be determined if a parish program will be able to use the facility. And, would a principal have sort of the ability to make a call on if they can use it or not? Do you have any information on how that relationship is being navigated?
Sure, I can answer that. Yes, I have an answer. The Catholic Schools Office has communicated to principals that no outside groups should use school property in the fall. However, Parish catechesis is not considered an outside group. Principals should not say to parish religious education programs that they can't be in the space. Having said that, I know of 2 principals who already said that to parish religious ed, and I am working with the superintendent to talk to the pastors so we can get some clarity, because I guess ultimately it is the pastor's decision, but in both of these instances, it looks like the principal has made the call without consulting the pastor. So the communication is that parish religious ed should be able to use the school facility as they have done in the past. However, communication is going to be essential because every time groups change in the building, it has to be cleaned. So if you meet in the evening, that means as soon as school's over, the building has to be cleaned. When you leave that night, the building has to be cleaned before the school kids come back in. So it's going to require a new friendship between principals and leaders that we're just not great at. And I'm hoping that later this summer, that Kelly Branham and Kelly is the interim superintendent, that we will host a Let's Be Friends webinar for principals and leaders together to say this exact thing, is that we are working on the same mission, just in different fields. So absolutely should be able to use the school. If there's a problem, let me know, and I'll try to help navigate that conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. So the next question is slightly related. It's, will the Archdiocese be providing specific safety and health measures for parishes to implement?
Yes and no. So yes, in that we are highlighting things that are essential. There are health and safety things that are mandatory. But like I was saying earlier, there are so many differences in space that some of those are going to look different. The best place to look first is the CDC guidelines, because everything that we are taking for opening of parishes, opening of schools, opening of religious ed, whatever, are coming from the CDC. We're taking the information. So for parishes, we're looking at the CDC guidelines for K-8 elementary schools and the guidelines for early elementary centers, because a lot of what we do looks more like early elementary education, and what they're doing for youth summer camps, because those 3 are models that look most like what parish religious ed looks like. And then we're trying to take from those what's going to be essential. We are hoping to develop a checklist for, if you can meet all these standards, then you're safe to open. And if you can't, then it's probably better that you don't gather in person until, sometime in the future when you can guarantee all of those.
Sounds great. Thank you, Sarah. And then the last question, at least on my end, is the Archdiocese going to provide an outline for what online meeting platforms are permissible, or are parishes free to choose which they would prefer?
We're going to do a slide on child protection in a couple, 2 slides from now. So let me see if I answer that online or through this, and then I'll see if I can come back to that question if I didn't get it right.
Sounds great. Thank you. So those
Great.
questions were great. If anybody else has any other questions, Doug and I are monitoring our email throughout the webinar, so please just shoot either myself or Doug an email with your question.
Okay.
Yep, that's all I have for right now.
Okay, so here we are at some of these are the highest level general health and safety principles. So like I said, consult the CDC guidelines. Also, depending on, you can look at the state of Maryland or the state of DC, but even within the state of Maryland, or state of DC, sorry, District of Columbia, in Maryland, you have to look at Maryland, and then you have to look at Montgomery County, Maryland, or Prince George's County, Maryland, or St. Mary's County, Maryland, because those jurisdictions are significantly different in what their expectations are. So if you can't meet the basic local jurisdiction restrictions, then then all bets are off. So that certainly is what Archbishop Gregory has communicated in terms of celebrating Mass. You know, he didn't move toward, basically saying we're not going to break the law, as hard as it, you know, as frustrating as it was to stay away from the Eucharist that long. We're not going to, you know, defy whatever the local jurisdiction has put in place. So that's your first, you know, what does that look like? And in that, you're going to find out what your group size can be. Sometimes a group size is based on just a number, nobody more than 100. Well, 100 people at St. Joseph's in Pomfret looks a whole lot different than 100 people at the Basilica, right? Like, so 100 may not be the magic number, because if you have 100 and you can't be 6 feet apart, then it's the lesser of the two. So if you can only have 45 people in your space, if you're going to keep them 6 feet apart, then 45 is your number, not 100. And then the other thing is, that's going to be just like the most basic, is don't make markers available to your kids, because if you do, every time a child uses a marker, it has to be cleaned and sanitized. Or if, you know, it's going to be, if you're going to make markers or crayons or whatever, glue sticks available, you know, if you're in a gathering, it should go in a Ziploc bag that only that child uses. I mean, those are the kind of things those are going to be your just most essential. The CDC has said for now, students over, and this is from the early childhood, particularly opening guidelines, in terms of basic classroom size. So if you're in a space that has kind of a typical, you know, schoolroom size room, your ratio is going to probably be 1 adult to 14 students if you're going to be able to do 6 feet apart. You know, and keeping younger children just 6 feet apart is going to be trickier, just because they just don't get it. You know, so if you have classes where you have 30 kids, you're going to have to split it into 2 classes. You know, so it may mean that you're going to have more sessions for probably 1st and 2nd and 7th and 8th, because those are typically the grades that we have the bigger classes. Depending on what the jurisdiction guidelines are at the time, face coverings should be worn by your staff and volunteers. If they are able to be well over 6 feet away from the students, they don't necessarily have to wear a mask. But if there's, like, at the beginning of class and they're greeting people as they come in, if they're, you know, exiting class, or if there's a time when they're, you know, moving through the classroom to you know, engage a student or something, they need to have the face covering on. We're trying to determine what will be the expectations for students wearing masks, and that's unclear at this point. But it looks like, you know, even into the fall, we're going to be asked to wear face coverings. It does not, for some of the schools, they're going to go ahead and get the plastic face shield because their teachers are there all day long, and instruction. We're not recommending that at this point for parish religious education, because, you know, we may be there an hour and a half, which is significantly different. However, if there's a volunteer who would feel more safe with one of those, they can provide their own and use that in a classroom. A key consideration is going to be bathroom use. The CDC is saying that we need to as best we can, clean and sanitize after each session, or even every use. I'm not sure that any of our parish programs are staffed for every use. So I think we need to think about, do we have janitorial staff that as soon as religious ed is over for the day, that bathroom will be thoroughly cleaned. In all of this, you know, we need to have soap and water available as best we can. Hand sanitizer is great for us to have available for our volunteers, but children are not. It's relatively toxic for children. So we don't want to have hand sanitizer in our classrooms for the students to use. So how that will look is going to be different. But certainly having it available for the staff and volunteers is a good idea. Certainly high-touch traffic areas should be cleaned. Any doors, windows you can prop open, the better. All of our parishes are being encouraged to open all windows and doors during Mass, even if it's loud and isn't their best use of our air conditioners, because that allows the air to flow more freely. So to the extent that we can model that as a best practice, the better. Prop all classroom doors open, prop open the outside doors to your building. But if you do that, then that means you need to have a dedicated person there monitoring who's coming in and out of the building. And then we need to limit entrance of parents to the building. So, this is especially for those programs that might meet during the week after school. When in the fall it gets dark so very early, we certainly don't want to just dismiss the kids out into the dark. But I think, can we look at models that the schools use where parents just pull up and the kids are kind of escorted out to their car by their catechist? We need to look at those kind of models, or have different kind of waiting zones for, first grade is going to dismiss 5 minutes earlier than everybody else. And once they're all picked up by their parents, or we've gotten the most of them out, than the second graders or whatever. How are we going to stagger? And the same is true for as they arrive, which is a little more complicated, especially for families that have multiple kids. But how do we stagger? Or can we dismiss out of 2 different doors of the building and have some of the kids go out one door and others, So those are the things that we want to limit the number of people coming in and out of the building, and stagger as we can in terms of getting people in and out. And I want to do just the online piece. So these are what it's sort of draft form, but it's more official than draft. So the Office for the Child Protection, the Office of Youth Ministry, and the Office for Catechesis have agreed that we will set the same expectations for any parish catechetical or youth ministry program, so that there will be less confusion. So the same expectations are in place for youth ministry, youth gatherings, as are in place for catechesis. These will look very much like Catholic Schools Office, but they do have the opportunity to create some of their own expectations, because all of the people who are teaching in their programs are paid employees. So their expectations can be different than ours, where we have mostly volunteers leading sessions. So you will see that the expectations outlined by Catechesis and Youth Ministry, in conjunction with what Courtney and her team are expecting from the Child Protection Office, are more robust than probably will be the case for Catholic schools. Having said that, the essential pieces are all the same. So if you are doing any virtual formation at all, you need a signed parent permission form for every student in your program. If you do not have that on file, students from that particular family are not allowed to attend until you have that. If the parents choose not to sign that form, we'll need to come up with an alternative for them in terms of formation. 2 Virtus cleared adults must be present for the entire gathering, whether it's a class, a meeting. Anytime we have kids together, the gatherings are more specifically youth ministry. But if we're gathering kids to pray, have a class, to have an official meeting of some kind, 2 Virtus cleared adults must be on the call, meeting, whatever, the entire time. They can't just be there at the beginning and the end. They have to stay on the line. If you are doing breakout groups, you need 2 Virtus cleared adults in each breakout group. And this has been a big issue for youth ministry because they are using breakout groups much more often than we are. However, a couple of our confirmation programs did use breakout groups. If you realize at the beginning of your session, you have 6 Virtus cleared adults, and you were going to have 4 breakout rooms, you need to restructure quickly and have just 3 breakout rooms so that you can have the 2 adults there. And in this, it doesn't mean you have to have 2 catechists. It means you have to have 2 Virtus cleared adults. So it may be that a second adult is just there monitoring the chat, monitoring who's present, just there as the observer, should there ever be any questions about what actually happened during the session. All virtual gatherings should be scheduled in advance and approved by either the parish catechetical leader or youth minister. This means your catechist just can't say, hey, I've decided to have an extra session on Tuesday night. They need to make sure that the leader knows in advance so that, so as for you just know what's happening with your catechists and your students. If there is a need to reschedule, that too should be communicated to the leader. So, and that has been the case a lot for youth ministry, where they get there and they don't have 2 Virtus cleared adults. So rather than hold the meeting, they've just decided to reschedule, but that rescheduling needs to go through the designated parish leader. And it doesn't necessarily, if you have staff and you appoint, your administrative assistant to do that, that's fine. It's just somebody has to be the designated contact who knows which catechist is meeting with which group. Parents should, and this is probably going to be changed to must, parents must be notified of all the sessions and how they'll be conducted. So some parents, if it's just a lecture, if it's more of a webinar, they don't feel the need to necessarily be there. If there's breakout groups or more of a dialogue going on, parents may want to be participants in that. So you may just have a very simple that says, this is a regular catechetical lesson. This is one where we think we're going to have more dialogue, just so the parents know when the sessions are. In that notification, they should have access to whatever the link is to sign up. So, and in many cases, especially for our younger students, they're going to be the ones there and they, that are logging their child in. But if not, they just need to have that information. Use of online chat feature is prohibited anytime there are students under the age of 18 in a gathering. You can use the raise your hand feature, and the person can be unmuted to speak, but if you want to have dialogue, but the chat is not allowed. Catechetical leaders or youth ministers are encouraged to drop in and monitor any sessions. So this would be just like you being able to pop into a classroom, if you were walking the halls when parish religious education was going on. Just that ability for you to pop in at any time is something that we think is a best practice. And so it's really tied to that one above, where you're aware of the scheduling, and each time those sessions should be scheduled as a co-presenter, so that you don't get sent into a waiting room to be admitted to the session. You can just pop in at any time. And it's certainly not meant to be a big brother is watching. It's just as we would do in any good, live session where we're available to drop into a class at any time. So this regards whether students should or can have their cameras on. Students are allowed to have their camera on so that we could see them with their parents' permission. So if parents do not want their child to be seen online, we can't mandate it. And that one is significantly different than the schools, because the schools are probably going to mandate that the students be seen on camera, especially at some of the higher levels, so that they can make sure that the kids are engaged. We can encourage parents to allow their children to have the camera on, and if they want to be present in the camera view, that is absolutely okay. But it's important that we know we cannot mandate it, and that parents are responsible for, and parents know that they're responsible for either, allowing their child's camera to be on or off as they want to monitor that. Any communication, follow-up to a meeting, a reminder of a meeting, should have at least 2 Virtus compliant adults on the communication. It doesn't have to be the same 2 that might be on the session itself. It just means that if I'm sending it out, so if the catechist is sending it out and they CC me, as the parish catechetical leader, that means that we've checked that box that 2 Virtus cleared adults know about what was communicated. I won't be the other adult on the session, but we've checked that box. Ideally, though, it is the same 2 people, so that the people know what was communicated are also the ones present for the session. But we know that may not always be the case. So, and if you wanted to be the second compliant adult, then you would just kind of have that written record of what's happening within your sessions. And then this last one, live meetings can only be recorded if all student cameras are off and no students are seen on screen. So this is a very strong concern for the Child Protection Office. They don't want any, even if we are only going to share a recorded video with within a secured site or with a limited group of people, once it leaves our hands, we can't guarantee that it won't be forwarded, it won't be edited, it won't be whatever. So we have made the call for catechesis and youth ministry that no live meetings like this one is considered a live meeting, even though you guys aren't on screen. But if you were visible on screen, could be recorded. If you want to pre-record and send it out to students, that's okay. But again, the Child Protection Office has said we don't want any video, including students, to go out to any of our groups. So having said that, if a parent, this isn't also just social media. I mean, these are probably going to be, the Office of Communications is working on a social media policy that will be mandatory for employees and volunteers. And it will address some of the things like what do we share on Facebook and things like that. And we're going to use best practices. This is specifically saying for our catechetical meetings, gatherings, sessions, youth ministry gatherings, we are not going to record the students in any fashion. So I'll pause there.
Sarah, we have many, many questions.
Okay, and we have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to do as many as I can, just so we can get through the last slide. So,
yeah, and I just wanted to remind everybody who's listening, we have all of the questions that have been received, even the questions that we will not be able to answer today because of timing. We will be following up with everyone with just a list of the questions and answers typed up, just so everybody has that as a reference as well. So Doug, if you can start us off with the first question.
Yeah, sure. So we had a question come in, 2 similar ones regarding verbiage for the waiver form. Sarah, is that something that our offices are working on that then parishes could include in their forms?
Yes, it's going to look like a combination of, I think, what we've done in the past for like our vacation Bible schools and our publicity release. And once these expectations are finalized and approved by the moderator of the Curia, we are going to work with legal to develop the parent permission form so that it encompasses the things that we've outlined here.
Okay. Another related question to that was, it was related to online and virtual classes. In addition to these criteria, what are some, or will we be able to share out some best practices on how to run an online class?
That's a whole separate webinar, and I think that's something that we will definitely be putting together and probably running in July or August. Because that won't focus on the child protection element. That will say, what are good methodologies so that it's not what we did here where I talked for an hour and a half. Right? Like, this is not good methodology, but I had a lot of information to share. For good catechetical methodology, it's going to be incorporating art and music and things like that.
Sarah, the next question is there a timeline set up for safe environment training and requirements already?
No, until we know exactly what that online piece is going to look like, it's impossible for us to set a timeline. My guess is that it will be kind of late fall, like it always is, but there's just too many unknowns until we know exactly what the Office for Child Protection Office is going to ask us to do. Other than we know it's going to be online, we don't have enough information to set a timeline.
Thank you. The next question is if there are videos or faith-based movies that are assigned from platforms like form.org, for example, do those virtual videos assignments, do those count towards class hours?
I think it's going to be use your best judgment, because if it's watching a movie, I'm not sure. For it to be catechetical, it needs to, I watch that content and then I show you that I learned something, or I can apply that to my life in some way. So my fear is that, and we've seen it in parish catechists too, where we used to have all those videotapes. You know, I've got an hour, I'm going to show a 30-minute video every time. I think as an occasional methodology, it's a very good idea. I think unless we somehow formalize it, intentionalize it, internalize it, it's kind of using up time to meet a marker rather than thoroughly robust catechesis.
Great. Some questions came in regarding the ADW standards, the curriculum standards. Are we still, are those still a focus for the year? And then also, what are some maybe ways to handle catechist certification?
So yes, the curriculum is still the guiding principle for all formation this year. That's the truths haven't changed. And that is our framework for what is important that we teach students at every grade level. So yes, that should be still, especially when you're identifying resources, to the extent that those align with the curriculum, the better, you know? So yes, keep that as a guiding principle. Catechist certification is, we have, the classes are available online through My Catholic Faith Delivered. We are piloting this summer a virtual format of the live class, and it's going well, I believe. So if that works out, we will have those live classes, which most people find more helpful than just doing the online formation by themselves. We will expand the capacity to do those in both English and Spanish. So certification is actually, in some ways, it might be more accessible than it has been in the past. We will need to work out what the certification retreat will look like as that culminating piece. But until somebody's completed all 6 courses, we have a little time to build that in.
Perfect, Sarah. So I think at this point, mindful of time, if you would like to continue, and then we can follow up with the other questions in as needed.
So I just wanted to end with thinking about innovative. So I read this quote, and I thought it was really beautiful. It's harder to show love, care, and compassion virtually or safely distanced. But if we get this right, if we do this well, if we find creative and innovative ways to love and serve and to reach out, we'll be ready for whatever happens next. I thought that was so beautiful. It's from a woman who does a kind of online hospitality piece. And I think that's essential in what we're thinking about. We're going to be catechetical, but we're going to have to be more inviting and hospitable than we may have been in the past. That welcoming is going to be key. So things to think about when you're trying to especially engage in these relational pieces, which are how we so often show love and care and compassion. Are there spaces that you could use where you might gather? So in theory, if you don't have the space to clean your building, your school, parish building, whatever, could you use the church for a gathering where you can space parents out with their children for a catechetical session? This would certainly be something you might consider for the sacramental groups. And if you were to look at a model like that, or do you have a school gymnasium, again, where you can, the more space you have, the more flexibility you have to gather people together. Could we gather by family group instead of grade level? Is for smaller programs, that might be something we could do. Could we say, this Sunday of the month, we're going to gather families with last name A through G, and then next week we're going to do H through S, whatever. Are those, because also when we work with family groups, it's easier because we can get a whole family group together and they have to be 6 feet apart from the next family group, whereas if it's people from different households, then it's 6 feet for everybody. So it might be an opportunity to look at kind of family groups. Do we look at in-person gatherings once a month for specific cohorts? I think particularly we need to think how we're going to engage for sacramental prep. For those families who may not have the technological resources, how do we print, prepare, drop off, pick up resources so that they can be engaged in the process? That might mean that we're delivering resources to a family because they, not only do they not have technology, they don't have a car. So how are we making sure that the people who are on the margins are not completely lost as we move forward, probably in a very rapid way? What are family prayer opportunities where we could gather either virtually or physically distanced? Do you have a statue on your parish property where you could have people socially distance outside and pray together? Could you invite the 3rd grade families to come on Friday evening to pray a decade of the Rosary? Are there devotions that we should try to do virtually? The fall, maybe, the weather should be nice enough that we might try to do some outside things as opportunities, certainly for prayer, near or on parish property or in some form in the parish church. And as we look farther into the fall, are there liturgical feasts that we can lift up virtually? Halloween is probably going to be out of the question this year, right? So as Catholics, it's not necessarily our big holiday. But what about an All Saints virtual parade? Where, could we? And this then is the social media piece where we say, okay, well, if we make this optional and you want to have a Facebook page where kids can dress up like a saint and show if parents post their kids, fine. Not make it required, but then again, just a way to engage in a way that's more creative than we might typically do. And thinking about how are we going to replace our nativity, our little Christmas pageants, because those are so important to families. Without filming kids, it's going to be tricky. So can we have the pastor read the Christmas story? Do we have adults who would be willing to go outside their comfort zone and actually dress up and do the nativity for the kids instead of the kids doing the nativity for the adults? Could we incorporate a sing-along in that? It's just, how are those things that we, again, it kind of goes back to my very first, what are those things that have been so important to us in the past that we want to keep in some form as we go forward? So here we are at 2:30. Caitlin and Doug, do we have lots of questions, or shall I just say we'll I'll do my best to write answers out to all those and send them to everybody.
My recommendation answers to everybody.
Okay. Haley,
Yeah.
Haley has spoken. So I'm sorry for going long, but I'm glad you all joined us. You know where to find us if you have questions. In the meantime, we have recorded all the questions. We've recorded this webinar. I will work on written responses to any of the questions that were not answered. If I can, I will send them out tomorrow with our Wednesday mailing. If that's not possible, they will go out to all of you as soon as I can, definitely by the end of the week. So thanks again. Know that I pray for you all the time. This is a crazy time. That's the end of the sentence. This is a crazy time. But I'm humbled by the work that you're doing and glad to be with you in this journey. So we'll end together giving praise to God as we say, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. God bless you all. Take care.